All right, welcome back. I'm going to finish up this real quick, and then we're going to go into another video real quick. Paul admits to preaching uncircumcision, that it's not necessary to circumcise the children. This is a clear violation of Torah, and if true, Paul would be charged with death. Deuteronomy 13, 1-5. What happens next, I've talked about before in different contexts, but I'm going to address it again to show you how far this cover story for Paul begins to fall apart even in Acts. Let's remember the depths of depravity here from Stanley, though. And we're going to show the hypocrisy of men like Chris, because they all teach the same thing to varying degrees. It doesn't matter how holy you preach, because if you say they can violate one, then you're saying they're going to fail in all. That's the stumbling block doctrine, the doctrine of Balaam. Well, I don't believe that I have to follow the Sabbath, but I have to keep myself from adultery, from fornication, etc. Well, you're saying they can violate Sabbath, which means it doesn't matter if you're keeping them from adultery. So let's listen again, and let's explain why they get themselves under the stumbling block.
And he would say to you, thou shalt not obey the Ten Commandments because those are...
You see, thou shalt not obey the Ten Commandments. And what does Chris do? He freaks out. But he told us in the other video that he agrees with this point, and Jim caught him on it. Now listen to Piper, another Reformed teacher.
John, are Christians under the Ten Commandments?
Are Christians under the Ten Commandments? Notice the language they even use, that this is a yoke, a heavy burden to obey the Father.
No. The Bible says we're not under the law. So I'm loving Romans 7, 4, 5, and 6. The analogy is you were married, and you better stay married, because if you leave this husband and go marry another, you're going to be called an adulteress.
Let's read that. Romans 7:1. Do you not know, brethren, for I speak to those who know the law? So he's speaking to Jews in this context, not to men like Piper, who even said he's not under the law, that the law has dominion over a man as long as he lives. For a woman who has a husband is bound by the law to her husband as long as he lives. Let's test that. But if the husband dies, she is released from the law of her husband. And this is a problem as well, because you remember Yeshua says, I am not the God of not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. So he's telling you that this scenario that he's playing out is absolutely impossible, because the husband didn't die. Even when he was in Sheol, he was not dead. Deuteronomy 24, the law of divorce. When a man taketh a wife and marry her, it come to pass that she find no favor in his eyes, because he has found some uncleanness in her, then let him write a bill of divorcement and give her hand and send her out of his house. And when she is departed out of his house, she may go be another man's wife. So clearly this is not even true itself. The woman wasn't bound by the law. If she is unclean, the husband can release her. The problem is, and this is what Paul is trying to explain poorly, is this side of it. Her former husband, which sent her away, may not take her again to be his wife. So he believes that this is God's solution in killing Christ, is to reconnect us to Yeshua, to Jesus, without violating the law. And this is what he's talking about here. And this is actually used from Torah teaching. And I agree with this part. The problem is Paul contradicts himself over and over and over again. And his writings create so much confusion, as you can hear from Piper. See, this says she is free from that law. And notice the word, that law. That she is no adulteress, though she married another man. You see, she was released because of her sin, and she married another man. Then he's saying, well, that man died, And this is what he's saying Yeshua did for them to reconnect them to God. And in order to not break the law of remarriage to the same husband, that's an abomination, he's saying, well, God had to do something to fix that. This is what Paul is trying to say in Romans 7:1-6. Not that Gentiles are free from the law, the entire law, but that the Jewish people whom the covenant is written to, and this is an important thing to understand too, is that so many Christians believe, well, I'm under the new covenant. This is impossible. And I'll read it from here and also from a site that does a great job exegeting the passage. Behold, the days are coming, says Jehovah, when I will make a renewed covenant, and that's the proper translation there, because he's not replacing what exists, he's renewing it, like renewing your vows with your wife, with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them. And they love that, because, oh, see, it's not according to, it's not the same. By the hand I led them out of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, says Jehovah. But let's remember, this isn't a covenant for Gentiles at all. So it doesn't matter what's different, that it's not according to the original covenant. What matters is who it's to and what it does. Yes, it is different in that we will no longer be able to break it. But this is the covenant that I will make with them in the house of Israel after those days. And this is important to understand. He's not talking about Yeshua coming the first time. It's the second coming, the day of the Lord, when Israel receives its promised land in full bounty from obeying Torah. Says Jehovah, I will put my law on their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God and they shall be my people. It's really that simple. The new covenant takes the entire Torah from the 5 books and writes it to your mind. Doing so will make it impossible for you to break Torah. That's another reason you're not under this covenant right now. Number 1, it's for Israel. Number 2, it doesn't remove the law. It's going to put it on your mind and on your heart. So saying that you're under the new covenant and then violating the Torah is an abomination to the Father. All right. Let's real quick try to get through another slide. Acts 21:26. Then Paul, having taken the men on the following day with him, having purified himself, was entering into the temple, announcing the fulfillment of the days of purification, till the offering was offered for each one of them. And this was another offering that likely included blood, and number 6 details this. This proves the Jews still made offerings at the temple, including those that believed in the Messiah, through the Levitical priesthood. And this is why one of the reasons I totally reject Hebrews. It's completely anti-Semitic garbage. Paul clearly believed these were valid, or else they would not be recorded doing them. This is probably about 14 to 20 years after the ascension. The type of offering for completion of the Nazirite vow is detailed in number 6. The problem is the men with Paul were not all circumcised. Acts 21:27-28. And as the 7 days were about to be fully ended, the Jews from Asia, having beheld him in the temple, were stirred up the multitude. They laid hands upon him, crying out, Men, Israelites, help! This is the man who, against the people and the law and this place, all everywhere, is teaching, and further also Greeks he brought into the temple, hath defiled this holy place. Remember, we revealed that Paul's words reveal him as the abomination, that he condemns righteous deeds and he justifies the wicked. I'll say again, as I think this is an important point, if you're still under the Paul delusion, to say Paul was against Torah in any way, Sabbath and clean foods, etc., is to side with his accusers here, and say Paul deserved death. I've come to see from reading his entire epistles, reading historical documents, and praying and fasting over this, that Paul did teach men everywhere to worship God contrary to Torah. Paul did defile that holy place, bringing uncircumcised men into the premises. Ezekiel 44, verse 9, thus says Jehovah, no son of a stranger, uncircumcised of heart and uncircumcised of flesh, comes into my sanctuary, even any son of a stranger who is in the midst of the sons of Israel. This is exactly what Paul did, and it shows the power of prophecy playing out right before people's eyes, but they miss it because of the great delusion of Christianity. Paul stood in the temple of God, believing he was God, and defiled the temple. He taught men to forsake Torah, becoming a stumbling block and placing them under the curses for breaking Torah.